Hey there, this is Priya, and welcome to Module 2 of the High Potential Solutions. So, what we're going to do today is discuss your personality and how it impacts your results. So, the goal of today's session is going to be for you to learn how to cross items off your master list. This is going to be, it's not difficult, but it's just a little bit difficult to explain. So, I'm going to ask you to pay a little bit of attention as we go through that portion. And don't worry, don't freak out as I go through it. I will reiterate the instructions until you get them. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through your personality assessments, and we're going to help you understand your personality characteristics. You're going to discover the parts of your personality that are potentially creating blocks to your results. So there will be three parts to the personality assessments. You'll be looking at your potential. So what can make you great? You'll be looking at where you go under stress. So these are the things that can potentially derail you. And you'll also learn a few techniques so that you can avoid getting into deep stress so that you fall into these derailing characteristics. And then you're going to learn about your values and your motives and what you prefer in life and how that impacts the way you influence your environments and people around you. So how you lead and the environments you like to be in, who you like to surround yourself with. So you're going to learn a lot about yourself today. And then ultimately, we are talking about personality, but more from the perspective of how others see you in the world based on your behaviors and how you show up in the world. So the cool thing is you're not bound to these characteristics. You can change them. You have a lot of power over them. And then because you understand your characteristics based on what you're trying to create in the world, you can transform the way people see you to improve the way you get results in the environments that you're in. Okay, so this isn't a right or wrong. It's not going to be this is the best and this is the worst. It's really for you to look at your environment, the results you're trying to create, and take what you have and what you know about yourself and your environment and put that all together so you can create the best scenario for yourself. So you've got a lot of control in what we're going to talk about today, and it's going to be a ton of information. So if any point in time you feel like you need to rest, you need to pause, you need to process, pause the video, take a rest, take your notes, walk away if you need to today, because this is going to be a lot of information, and then come back and get to it when you're ready. Okay, so you've got a lot of freedom in this. Enjoy the process, and let's jump in right away with crossing off your master list. So at the end of yesterday's session, I told you today I would tell you how to start crossing items off your master list, and so let's get into that. So the very first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to download an app. And the app that I really like is called Be Focused. It helps you create time blocks. So whether you work for 30 minutes and take a 5-minute break, or 45 minutes and take a 10-minute break, that's up to you. I'm going to recommend to you what has worked best for me based on how I experiment, and for the purposes of this program, how you can get the most out of this program and really get your productivity up. So I'm making a few assumptions in the way that you're going to use the app. I'm making the assumption that you are an independent business owner, that you work from home or an office, and that you are often stationary and not required to be in a lot of places that have you moving around and giving you very short blocks of time to work in. So I am making the assumption that you can comfortably work for 25 minutes at a time, okay? And I'm also making the assumption that as we begin this process, it's not going to be easy. It's actually going to be a challenge to find solid blocks of time to work in. So we're going to make things more challenging slowly. We're going to give you time to adjust. We're going to give you time to learn. And what I'm going to ask you to do is stick to the process. Try not to jump ahead. Stay where we are, and you will have much more success if you stay where we are and not try to jump ahead and do more than is asked of you, okay? So let me show you this app called Be Focused. Okay, so this is the app that I like. It's called Be Focused. You don't have to download this. I just like it because I find it really easy. I can have it on my desktop. I can have it on my phone. use it however I like. So I'll just explain why I like this app, and then you can make your decision for yourself, or you can just download this app, especially if you have a Mac. I believe you can download it for Android or other systems as well. But this is the app that I like. Again, so you can see the red, so you can find it when you are looking it up. You can easily recognize it when you find it. So it's called Be Focused. And the reason why I like it is you can see here, you get these timers, right? So you can time yourself for 25 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever works for you. And then it also allows you to put tasks in here. So for example, you can say, I'm working on graphic design. You can time exactly how long you want to do that. You're interacting with your team, all of these types of things, so you can get a sense what you did on any given day, how many time blocks you spent on it, and you can categorize things. Then if you really want to track your progress, you can get into this section, look at your progress. I don't really use these things. I don't feel like I need them. And then if you feel the desire, you can change your settings, your work intervals, your short break, your long break. So I leave the settings as is. They work really well for me. And we're going to build up. So you don't have to worry too much about how many intervals per day. This first week, we're just going to do one interval. We're going to keep it super, super easy. And that's all I really want you to do. So I'll get back to that. So this is just the app for whenever for you to use. But you don't have to go hardcore yet. Just follow the program that I'm going to show you, and you'll build up over time, okay? So as I said, this week we're going to keep things really, really easy. So all I'm going to ask you to do is, once you've watched the videos for the day, commit to only one 25-minute focus block of work time every single day, and then just work as you normally would. So all I'm going to ask you to do is one 25-minute block of time. So you might, this week, you might spend 25 minutes working on creating your master list. If on your master list you put something like tidy your office or clean up a closet, or something similar, you can spend 25 minutes per day working on one of those things. You might be cleaning up your email, your files, any of those things. So use your 25-minute focus block of time. So what is a focus block of time? A focus block of time is where you are completely focused on one task to the point of completion. So if you say you're going to work on email, you open one email, you file it, you delete it, or you reply to it. If you haven't done one of those three things, you don't go on to the next email. So what is really, really important here is you work on a single task until the point of completion. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have your desk perfect, but you might say, I'm going to work on one pile today, or I'm going to get as much as I possibly can get done in terms of cleaning up my desk in the next 25 minutes. And you do nothing else. You do not answer the phone. You do not go on Facebook. You do not talk to anybody. You don't go to the bathroom. You don't get it. It's just 25 minutes. You can totally handle this. Okay, if you really have to go to the bathroom, you can go to the bathroom. But the point is, you want to stay really super focused on the task at hand. And that's why I'm only asking you to do 25 minutes a day, because you're going to learn about how focused you are, how not focused you are. And this is like going to the gym, right? So I'm not going to get you to go to the gym and run 10K the first day, right? We're just going to do a nice, 5-10 minute run. So this is like, you're not running, so it's just 25 minutes, but you're not going to go and run for 1 minute and then, do like 2 arm curls and 1 push-up and then run for 30 seconds. We're not doing circuit training. We're keeping you super focused for 25 minutes to get this work done. And this is going to teach you how you work, and it's going to help you build efficiency. So week 1 is probably going to be really hard. You're going to go, oh my goodness. Some of you will, not all of you. Some of you might find this a breeze. But if you're not the type of person who finds focus easy, this is really going to be a challenge. But just think, you have to do one 25-minute block this week, every single day. So just try to do that and stay really focused while you do it, and pay attention. How much work did you get done? How often did you find yourself getting distracted? What was distracting you? So really become aware. So I talk about focus and awareness, right? So this is step one, right? We want to get focused on our work and become aware of everything that distracts us and teach ourselves to work for that full 25-minute block, okay? So that's a 25-minute block. And then once you've done that 25-minute block, what you're going to do is you're going to get a little notepad, just like a sticky notepad or a little notebook or something, and just give yourself one little hash mark for that 25-minute block that you did. So this week, 7 days, 7 25-minute blocks. So you should have 7 hash marks by the end of the week, okay? And if you don't get all 7, that's okay. You'll learn, okay? This is a learning process. But do your best. Commit to it. I know you can do it. Just go for those 7 hash marks by the end of the week and be honest with yourself, because the more honest you are with yourself, the better the results you're going to get, okay? So that's it. All you do is do a 25-minute focus block of work time each day, using the Be Focused or another Pomodoro app. And then once you're done, you give yourself a little hash mark on a notepad. That's it. It's pretty simple, right? So I'm going to explain how those hashtags on the notepad work. And you use those hashtags to start crossing items off your master list, okay? So this part's going to get a little hairy. So bear with me. I'm going to do my best to explain it with you. If you're a little bit confused, jump on the call on Thursday and I'll explain it to you again, okay? So what you're going to do is get a small notepad. And this is going to be like your little daily Bible of how focused you were with the work you did. So this week, all you have to do is one 25-minute block, and you don't need to rush it. We're going to up the intensity over time, and you're going to see how this works, okay? So all you have to do is get a small notepad. At the top, we're going to assume you currently have no clients, okay? If you have clients, I'll explain what to do in just a second. But if you have no clients, at the top of the notepad, just make a 1x, as in 1 times, right? So at the top of the notepad, it'll say 1 time, and underneath it, you'll have 1 little hash mark. That's it, if you currently have no clients, okay? If you happen to have 1, 2, 3 clients, it's going to be a little different. So if you happen to have 1 client, you'll put 2x at the top of the notepad. So essentially everyone gets a 1x no matter what. If you happen to have 1 client, you put 2x at the top of the notepad, and then your hashtags go beneath that. Now, let's say you happen to get another client while you're doing this, right? So now you have 2 clients, and you've started your week. You had 2x at the top of the page. You've made 3 hashtags. Now you signed up another client. So now you put a 3x under that, and you start making a new set of hashtags. Okay, and I'm going to explain this to you visually in another way in case some of you are like, what is she talking about? So I'll explain it again. So all you do, no clients, you put a 1x at the top of the page and you start adding hashtags. Now let's say you add 1 client, beneath those hashtags write 2x, and then start putting hashtags on the page. You add even an additional client. So for if you have 2 clients, it'll be 3x. If you have 5 clients, it'll be 6x. If you have 7 clients, it'll be 8x. Does that make sense? So always add 1 to the number of clients that you have, and that's the number of times that you're going to multiply the hashtags. So you'll just continue with new hashtags under each multiplier, right? So the 1x is a multiplier, right? So if you have 1 hashtag, you have a multiplier of 1x, you times those hashtags by 1, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to explain this to you visually because I can see some of your eyeballs are probably popping out of your head and spinning, wondering what the heck I'm talking about, okay? And I'll explain it to you again. But before we go there, what I'm going to tell you is on Friday what you do is you're going to add up the hash marks under the 1x. That's the multiplier. So you're going to multiply those hash marks under the 1x by 1, then the ones under the 2x by 2, and so on and so forth, okay? And then you're just going to add them up on Friday. So this is what it's going to look like visually, okay? Actually, I'll get there in just a second. If you happen to have a client that is no longer paying you, so you've completed your work with them, then you remove a point from the top of your current list. So you might start the week, you have, and I know this is accelerated. Some people, it won't be accelerated. So you might start, you have no clients at the top, right? And you put 2 or 3 hashtags, then you add a client. Now you have a 2x multiplier, 2 or 3 hashtags. Now you've completed with that client. So now you're down to 1x multiplier again, right? So you just keep going on in that way. Okay. So this is what it will look like. And I'm doing this by weeks, but typically what I do is I run this by months. Okay. So let's say week 1, you have no clients, right? So this is essentially what your page will look like. Week 1, you have no clients, but you've done 4 sets of time blocks. So you'd go 1 times 4, you get 4, right? Then week 2, you bring on 1 paying client. So now your multiplier becomes a 2x multiplier. And let's say you've done 3 solid time blocks of 25 minutes, right? So it'll be 2 times 3, and you get 6 points for week 2. Now in week 3, you've completed working with one of your paying clients, right? So now instead of a 2x multiplier, you're back to 1x. So you went from having 1 client back to 0 clients. So now you have a 1x multiplier, and you've done 5 time blocks, right? So you've got 1 times 5. What is your multiplier? 5 is the number of hashtags, right? 1 times 5. And then week 4 is looking pretty good, right? So you get 2 new paying clients, and now you've jumped to a 3x multiplier, and you've done 5 time blocks during the week. It will be much higher than this. I'm just giving you these little tiny time blocks. This is usually what your daily time blocks will be, right? So let's just say you worked for 5 time blocks during the week. So you would have a 3 times multiplier, you do 5 time blocks, and then you'd get 15 points for week 4. And you add them all up, and you get a total of 30 points, right? So you've got 4 plus 6 is 10, plus 5 is 20. 4 plus 6 is 10, plus 5 is 15, plus 15 is 30. So you'd get 30 points or $30, okay? So this is how you're going to start crossing things off your master list. Once you get to $30, what you're going to do is you're going to look at your detailed master list. So it'll be on Trello or a similar tool where you have the amounts, you've got every single little item on that list, and you'll look at that detailed mastered list and you might say, oh, I wanted to replace our chip cups, and they'll be around $30. So adding up all the points I got this week, this Friday, I've got $30, and you're actually going to go out, you're going to buy those new cups. Don't buy anything else. Basically, until you add up these points, you only want to get food, pay your bills, do very minimal things, no programs, limited to no entertainment, nothing. And the reason why we do this is because you will notice when you follow this process, these points start adding up incredibly fast. So the first few weeks are going to feel slow and painful. But when all of a sudden you're going to start getting clients, you're going to start getting more, you're going to get more committed to the work, you're going to get more efficient, you're going to get more productive, and these points will start adding up incredibly fast. So that even if you have no clients, it's very easily possible to collect $70 worth of points in a single week. It's very, very easy, 50 to 70, depending on how you want to do things. So that would convert to $50 to $70 to move towards that master list and implementation and moving things forward in your life, okay? And remember, we also put things on the master list that didn't involve any money at all. They just required your time. So you can move towards creating some of those things and using up time blocks and not using any money at all, okay? So you can think about it. The whole goal is to help you move in your environment and in your lifestyle towards the life that you want, and do it by working towards it versus praying towards it. And there's a little bit of both, but you will start creating, and this works incredibly, incredibly fast, okay? So what you do is every single Friday, you review your points. And if you have something on your master list that you can implement, you get to go buy that on the weekend. You get to upgrade your home. You get to upgrade your closet. You get to buy little treats that you've always wanted. And you do it every Friday. So I'm not telling you to do what other people tell you to do, where they say, go have a spa day and you'll land a client. I'm going to tell you to work towards that spa day. So you can potentially collect 100 points or 150 points in 1 or 2 weeks. Easy spa day, and it's a totally deserved spa day that you'll absolutely love. So you can put those things on this list. So every Friday, review your points and go out and buy something off your master list to start moving closer and closer to that life you desire on a visual basis. And if say you want something really expensive, like something that's $2,000 or $5,000, then you can simply do this. Save up points so you don't have to spend them every week, and you get to make this choice and say, okay, I'm going to start moving some cash towards that goal. And ultimately, if you have something that you're saving up to, what I do is I create a separate bank account, and then I'll just move that small amount of money, 30, 70, 100, 200 every single week. And there are weeks where you can easily gather 500 points. When you have a certain number of clients. That's not difficult. So in 4 weeks, you could easily save up to buy something worth $2,000. So this helps on so many different levels. It's going to help with your budget. It's going to help to keep you motivated. It's going to help you to keep you excited. It's going to help you see transformation in your environment, so you don't have that sense of like, why am I doing this? Like nothing ever changes. I just keep working and it's just never changing. This is going to help you see and feel and experience a change. And that's what this master list is all about. So if you've missed anything, you're confused about anything, ask your questions on Thursday and I will do my best to explain them to you. And we will be doing a video Q&A. So if you need anything explained, I will be able to show you the notepad and walk through it with you. Okay? So hopefully that was understood and you can figure it out. But if not, we will talk about it on the Thursday call again. Okay, now that I've shown you how to cross things off your master list, the next thing I'm going to do is ask you to grab your assessments. So there's 3 assessments. You can see the middle center is called the potential assessment. It's in yellow. The top right is the challenge. It's in red. And the top left, that is the leadership values profile, and that's in blue. So we're going to start, first off, we'll start with the Hogan Personality Inventory, which is in yellow. So if you want to grab that, we'll jump into interpreting that in just a second. Okay, so you should have the yellow assessment out. So you'll see on the front, it'll say Hogan Development Insight, HPI, and HPI, it stands for the Hogan Personality Inventory, but you will also see it here. You can see the Hogan Personality Inventory, but you will also see the word potential in a number of different places. So what this really looks at is normal personality, and it looks at your potential based on a number of characteristics that we'll review together. So this first page, the key thing to really grasp is that high scores are not necessarily better than low scores. Each score has positives and negatives, and even if you're in the middle of the scale, there can be positives and negatives. So there is no best score. It's more awareness for yourself, okay? And so you can see an example here. You've got adjustment, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but you can see low scores tend to be open to feedback, which is great if you're developing skills, you're learning from others, they're candid, they're honest, but you can also be moody and self-critical, right? And so if you're really open to feedback, we can tend to be a little bit harder on ourselves. And these are, being open to feedback is a great skill to have if you're developing and growing to higher levels. Now, high scores, they tend to be calm, they tend to be steady under pressure. I'm dropping things as I read that really well times. But they also tend to be resistant to feedback. So it's harder to grow and develop these people. So where you might tend to find higher scores would be either if you're in a lower part of an organization, this person would really struggle to grow and develop because they'd be very resistant to feedback. But at higher levels in the organization, CEO, for example, having these characteristics can be very good because you want to have feedback, but you want to be able to have that internal compass to decide, okay, this is good, I'm going to use this information. This information isn't good. Otherwise, if you're in that CEO level position, it can be easy to get swayed in all different directions and never be able to make a decision. So you can see in terms of adjustment, both sides of the scale, they have benefits and disadvantages, okay? So that was the other piece that I wanted to share is you want to interpret these scales in terms of the role that you're playing, right? So if you are the CEO of your company, certain characteristics are going to be much more valued than if you are, a virtual assistant or a team member, or there's certain characteristics that are much more amenable to a leadership role versus a role as a team member. And again, neither is better or worse. They're all required for the success of an organization. So this is not sort of looking at it and be like, oh, I'm not a team member, I'm a CEO, I'm a company owner. Well, if you are a company owner and you work for other company owners, then you have to sort of think about what characteristics work best when you're providing service to other company owners in that context. So you might actually flip back and forth. So myself as a business coach, when I'm leading my team, I have to bring out certain characteristics of myself. When I'm coaching clients, I have to bring out other characteristics of myself. When I'm being coached, I have to bring out other characteristics of myself. So that's what I'm saying. It really depends. It's not an either or. So it's really getting an understanding of this is my natural tendency, and I'm going to have to work on these other areas to develop these other areas to maximize my ability to grow, learn, and lead, and develop and grow my business. Does that make sense? Okay, I really hope that does. So this HPI is based on the 5-factor model of personality, or OCEAN: openness, neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, and okay, let me do this again. It's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So it's based on those 5 scales, but they've gone into more granularity, okay? So the way these scales were developed, so essentially what happened is you would be considered the target person, the person who has these assessments in front of you, and they would have given another assessment to a close friend or family member, and a third assessment to a work colleague. And essentially what they said is they asked you as the target person, they said, here's a big survey. Can you answer all these questions? And it would ask you things like, do you like riding in fast cars? Do you like trying different kinds of wines? Do you like to be in leadership roles? And then they would ask your close friend or family member and your work colleague how they perceived you. So what this assessment tells you is how your close friends, family members, and work colleagues perceive you based on the way you've answered the questions on the assessment. So the cool thing is that you may like certain things which cause others to perceive you a certain way, but you can get to play with that and change perceptions if you know what is underlying those perceptions. Does that make sense? So you actually have control over the way others perceive you and the results that you create in your business. Okay, so that's how all the scales were developed. And these are the ones that we're going to look at for this first scale, which is the Hogan Personality or Potential Assessment. So we're going to look at the 7 scales on the left side. So we're going to look at adjustment, ambition, sociability, interpersonal sensitivity, prudence, inquisitive, and learning approach. And I will go through those one by one. And I'm going to ask you to sort of pay attention to your reactions. Does this make sense? Do I see myself doing these behaviors? Have others mentioned that I display these behaviors? So I want you to ask all of those questions of yourself as we go through this, okay? But before we jump into detail, I want to give you a quick understanding of what this executive summary is. So it is computer generated, so it can be a little bit blunt, and it might not apply to you. What I want you to do is just glance through it and ask yourself, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And if something really strikes you like, that's triggering me, circle it and really pay attention to that section when we go over that particular scale. Okay, so just circle it and get some awareness. You might want to, once you circle it, make some notes on it so you can go back and reference those items. And then when we get to that particular scale, you will have more information to interpret this information. But I say take it with a grain of salt. It is computer generated, and we all have certain characteristics, intricacies that can influence how to interpret these results, okay? Awesome. So let's get into the scale. So what you're going to see here on the next page, so this is page 4, you're going to see percentile scores. And what this tells you essentially is if your scores are between 0 to 25, they're relatively low. And again, low is not low as an overall low and high is not overall high, but this just kind of puts you in a range. So 0 to 25 is low. Between 26 and 75, that's pretty much average. And then 76 and above is considered high. Okay, so these are not absolutes. There may be some grays in this. So just take it all with a grain of salt, and we'll look at it in more detail. So this is an example of a particular individual, and this is just a sample report, so there's nothing real in this. But you can get a sense of what this person's scale. So this person, they're a pretty solid, calm person. They're fairly ambitious. They're pretty outgoing, pretty sensitive, they're pretty conscientious, they ask a lot of questions, and they're really into learning through textbooks, etc. So that's, I know I do that really fast that some of you might be freaking out, but this isn't necessarily, this is just sort of how to think about this, right? So you probably got this picture of this sort of steady, easygoing, outgoing, sociable. You might think of this person as somewhat like pretty perfect, right? Most of us do not show up like this. Some of you might. But it's just sort of a certain way of looking at a person. So high level, don't worry too much about that. Okay, so let's go to the first scale. So the first scale is adjustment. And what that essentially tells you, I went over it fairly quickly. So remember, if you're a high scorer, you'll be above 75, low score below 25, and the rest of you will be somewhere in the middle. So each of you can see the description. So the adjustment scale predicts the ability to handle stress, manage emotions, and listen to feedback. That's what we're looking at, right? So high adjustment, you handle stress better, you manage your emotions better, you're less open to feedback because you kind of know what's up. You believe you know what's up. You're lower, you're going to be, more reactive to stress. Your emotions might be a little bit more volatile, but you're also more open to feedback. So you're going to get your own score interpretation, which you can see under score interpretation. You can take a quick read of that and get a sense of, does this make sense? Highlight, underline anything that you have questions about. And then really think about your own look at the discussion points. So here for this individual, describe your approach to dealing with stress. So this individual might, not really feel affected by stress, or they might feel affected by stress. So it's really to ask yourself these questions. The scale is not 100% correct. You have to look at your own behaviors, right? When and how. So you want to ask for this particular individual, when is it appropriate to seek feedback for job performance? So this person may say, oh, I always know. And so there is something to question and ask about. So those are just some discussion points that you can look at. And then at the bottom are some subscales which give you detail, which I'll get into in a second. So the main thing to know about in terms of adjustment is if a person is high on adjustment, and I sort of went into this one already, they will typically show up, they handle pressure well, They tend not to take criticism as personally. They expect to succeed. They kind of come across like they know what's right and what's wrong, but they tend to overlook their mistakes, and they might also be a little bit difficult to coach. So if you're high on adjustment, ask yourself, like, are you open to coaching? Do you think you're right all the time? But you also have those other balancing characteristics where you handle stress well, you expect to succeed. So there is balance in that sense. Now, on the other side, low scorers, you'd be more open to admitting your shortcomings, right? What else can I learn? Where else can I develop? You might tend to hang on to your mistakes a little bit more, and worry about not performing well. So on the lower end, really about how can I get better? How can I develop? What did I do wrong? And on the high end is kind of like, I can do no wrong. So in the middle, fairly calm under stress. You can listen to stress, listen to criticism without taking it too personally. Tend to have a balanced understanding of strengths and shortcomings, more likely to learn from their mistakes, and tend to be patient with others. So you get that sense, right? So there's a little bit more volatility if you're low on the adjustment scale, emotional volatility, a sort of stern steadiness if you're on the high end of the scale, and there's a little bit more balance in the middle. So that's the adjustment scale. And then you can look at these subscale compositions at the bottom. So if it's this person, if all of these yellow bars are filled in, they're not a very irritable person. If your bars are mostly a light gray color, you might experience more irritability. If all these bars for under no guilt, if all the bars are filled in, you don't feel a lot of regret about life. If they're a little on the light gray side, you're going to feel a lot more regret about life, okay? If they're for even-tempered, if they're all yellow, pretty stable, you don't get too moody, you're not too irritable, but if they're on the light gray side, there might be a little bit more moodiness around different things. Now, trusting, all yellow, pretty trusting, don't have a lot of paranoia. If you got more gray, you might feel a little bit more suspicious of things. Now, just be aware of these things. There's really no good or bad. These are just different characteristics of people. And I'm sure people, some people are a little bit more suspicious, a little bit more paranoid. It doesn't make them bad people. And some people can be very trusting, right? And they might experience things that are great, and they might have some negative experiences because they're so trusting as well. So not anxious. So this is like not feeling anxiety. If they're all yellow, if they're more towards a gray, there will be more anxiety. Again, all yellow will be more calm. If they're more gray, it'll be more sort of emotional volatility. All yellow, no complaints. More gray, more complaints. All yellow. A good relationships with authority figures. So if there's more of that light gray color, then there might be a reason to go look at your relationships with authority figures like parents or teachers or caretakers when you were young. And was there something going on with those caretakers that might make you a little less trusting of people in authority? So just that is the scale for adjustment. And now if you have any questions, you need to process this, pause the video here, take your notes, and then come back onto the Thursday call and ask your questions on that call, okay? So if you have anything about this scale in particular, take 1 or 2 notes, key points, and we can discuss on the Thursday call, all right? So now that we've covered adjustment, let's get into ambition. Same idea for the scale. Top 25 percentile would be considered high, so 75 to 100 is considered high. 0 to 25 is considered low, and everything else is in between. And I'm going to let you use your judgment in terms of if you're towards the higher or the lower side. And again, there's no good or bad. Each side of the scale represents something different. So I'm going to go through this in the similar way that I did with respect to adjustment. So the description of the scale, the ambition scale, it predicts your likelihood to take on leadership roles, your drive, your competitiveness, your ability to take initiative and step up and sort of jump into those somewhat uncomfortable situations when someone needs to step up and take action and create results. So that's essentially what the ambition scale tells you. Now, some people, you're comfortable where you are. You don't want to grow into larger roles. Some people have more of a desire to grow into larger roles. So think about what that means for yourself. So just sort of pause for a second and ask yourself, do I want to take on a higher role? Am I the type of person who's going for a CEO position, or am I the type of person who wants to speak from stage and make 7 figures? Or am I kind of comfortable where I am and I just want to make some more money and live a comfortable life and help some people and do my art or create my craft, but I'm not really out there to be seen and be huge. And so you can still succeed, but your definition of success may be a little bit different. So I'll give you you'll be able to look at your own score interpretation, which is the second category. I won't read this because, of course, this is a fictitious example. And then sort of look at the discussion points on your own ambition scale. But before we even do that, I'll give you more of a descriptor of what the different types of ambition look like. So the 0 to 25% category, considered or described as the low scores, if you're in that category, you're probably more comfortable letting other people take charge. You're more likely to be diplomatic in the way you approach things rather than being really bold and head on in terms of how you ask questions. So I would be probably, I'm somewhere in the middle, but I'm more direct in the way I communicate, which must be pretty obvious to some of you. But others have, they tend to avoid confrontation a little bit more. So I'm a little bit in the middle because I avoid confrontation, but in a safe environment, I tend to be a little bit more blunt and direct. So you can get a sense of what that looks like. So the low scorer, you'll tend to avoid confrontation. You're really good team players, not very competitive. You can kind of go with the flow, work with the team. You don't necessarily have your own agenda. I've got to accomplish this on this date. You might not enjoy speaking in public, so you might be a little bit shy about doing webinars or getting out there or standing in front of an audience and giving a talk. And you might choose to work in areas that are comfortable. So I'm already good at this, so I'd rather stick with what I'm already good at rather than continuously growing and developing skills. If you're lower on the ambition scale, you tend to go with what you're good at, what you're comfortable with. You avoid conflict. So it's a pretty kind of a collaborative, team-oriented type of personality, okay? The high scores, you enjoy taking charge and making decisions, right? So you know what you want, you go after it, that kind of thing. You tend to take on more difficult challenges. So you like to challenge yourself to the next level on a continuous basis. You typically would enjoy public speaking. But you tend to carry this sort of this confidence about you, this sense of taking charge, and you want to advance in your life, and you may have a competitive side to you. So all of this, can you imagine, I know what I want, I'm going to take charge, I'll speak in front of the stage. So you can probably sense that mentality can be a little bit intimidating to people. So if you're a little bit like that, now I've probably developed myself more towards that side. It's not all that natural for me. But if you have that, then some people might get a little bit more intimidated by you and kind of wonder wow, they have a certain presence about them, a certain, they know what they want, they're going after it, and that can be really intimidating to some people, okay? So that's the high end of the scale. Now, in the middle, you're more still oriented towards goals, but your goals are going to be a little bit more on that achievable side, right? If you're very high on the ambition scale, you're going to be doing those goals that other people think are crazy, right? The person who's going, they want to build an empire, right? The realistic goal person might say, I'm an independent business owner. I want to make enough income that's comfortable for me. Maybe I'll have 3-4 team members, 6 figures, $10,000 a month. That's really comfortable. And that's where they feel really good. And I'm just throwing out these numbers based on, what's really common in the industry. So you can get a sense, right? if you're in the middle, you might have you avoid confrontation, you'll be a little bit diplomatic, but you're more likely to step up and say what needs to be said than someone who's lower on the scale and really likes to get along with everybody. Somebody who would be lower on the ambition scale would say something like, go along to get ahead, right? That would be more of their mentality. If you're towards the middle, you're more likely to take charge, but you want to stick with your current skill sets and your strength. The high ambition person they're going to push their skill sets and their strength. They're going to go for it. So if you're in the middle, you're like, you know what? I'm good at this. I'm going to stick with my skill sets and strengths. Not really trying to, develop my copywriting skill. I'm going to hire someone to do that if I'm not already good at copywriting. Somebody who's very ambitious has to get good at copywriting. They have to get good at leadership. They have to get good at marketing. They have to get good at everything. That kind of a thing. Now, a mid score, you'd be willing to speak in public. It's not like pulling teeth for you, but, if you can avoid it, you'll probably avoid it. So that's probably where I am. Like, I'm more willing to speak in public. I don't look forward to it. But once I get out there and I start speaking, I can totally enjoy myself. But I'm not trying to create more than enough opportunities to speak in public. And then again, the middle of the scale, you tend to accept challenges that are consistent with your skill level, okay? So ask yourself those questions, sort of see what triggered you, what makes sense. Then ask yourself, well, how does this show up in public? Do I like to take on public speaking opportunities? Yes, sometimes, not at all. Do I avoid it? Is it like pulling teeth? Ask yourself, do you show up with a certain level of intensity? Maybe you are a little bit, you might show up as a little bit intimidating to people, which means if you're running a business, you wouldn't necessarily be surprised that your team members don't necessarily give you, very honest feedback. They might hold back a little bit if you have that intimidating quality. So you might miss out on getting all the valuable information your team members have to share with you if you sort of presented in a slightly different way. So you'll have the discussion points on your page. So you can kind of see an example here. For example, they've mentioned like, what role do you typically assume on projects where there's no established leader? Do you tend to hide out in the crowd? Do you take the lead? Do you tend to have the mentality of saying, I don't really want to take the lead, but if there's no one, fine, I'll do it, right? That would be somebody in the middle. Somebody who's high will be like, oh, me, I want to be the leader, right? So ask yourself that kind of question. And then, when and how is it appropriate to engage in office politics? Somebody who's high on ambition, they're going to go for it. Their goal is advancement in their career. Someone who's in the middle, occasionally, if it's not rocking the boat too much, you might stay quiet. And if you're on the low end for ambition, if everyone's happy, you're not saying anything, right? So as long as everything's running smoothly, you're going to let the boat run smoothly. So ask yourself those types of questions. Look at the discussion points on your own page. Get a sense of maybe how competitive you are, how you seek to pursue opportunities. So you'll know if you're like, oh my God, I want to go for it. That's my mentality. You'll be talking about 7 figures and 8 figures and billionaires and boats and I don't know, leadership positions and speaking on stage and TED Talks. So that's like the higher end of ambition. And not even necessarily, because you don't necessarily need those combinations, but I'm just sort of giving you a sense of what it might look like. Somebody on the lower end might be, I want to take care of my family. I just want to take a vacation. I want to have enough money to pay the bills. Maybe you want to write a book, but you don't need it to be on the New York Times best-selling list. Like writing a book, getting it on Amazon, that's pretty good. So you can get a sense of the differences between the high and the low and see where you stand and what those scales mean for you, okay? Now I'm just going to look a little bit at the subscale. So I'll start on the left and then I'll go on the right, and maybe later on I'll highlight these for you so it's easier, but we'll see what happens, okay? So competitive is the first one. And essentially if you're high on competitive, like this example, all yellow, this person's really determined to get ahead. They're competitive, ambitious, they're persistent. Versus if they weren't so competitive, they'd be more laid back and just sort of do their thing and happy in terms of how things come along or they don't. So the next one here is accomplishment, and that sort of satisfaction with your own performance. So if you're high on the scale, if this person is all yellow, they'd feel pretty confident. They're doing a great job. They feel good about their performance. Whereas somebody who's got more grays, like this particular individual, they would sort of lack more confidence, think they could do better. They might be a little bit hard on themselves. They could be a little bit of a perfectionist. So there's a lot of different things that come into play here. Now, identity, so satisfaction with one's life. So your sense of identity, if you were high, you really have this sense of focus and career direction. And then if you lacked identity, you might say things like, I don't know what my purpose is. I'm not feeling passionate about anything. So yellow is high, and then the light gray is low again. Self-confident is this idea of, really knowing what you're about, feeling confident about what you've done in life, who you are, what you stand for, versus if you had lighter grays, you'd feel less confident. And I just, I realized I used the word confident under accomplishment. I probably shouldn't have done that because that's probably confusing to you. But like accomplishment is that you really like what you've accomplished in life. You have this sense of fulfillment. You like the work that you're doing. And if you're light gray on accomplishment here, then that's sort of, you feel like you could do more, right? That kind of a thing. So I spoke about it, but I just don't, I'm sorry about if I confused you a little bit with self-confidence there. Okay. Now leadership, that's sort of your willingness. You want to take on leadership roles, right? We talked about that group example, and you're like, I'll lead, that kind of a thing. That's somebody who's got that leadership mentality. And then if you're low gray, you'll be more reluctant to assume leadership roles. So if you're in a group of 5 people, you might be one of the last 1 or 2 people to assume the leadership role if, I don't know, everybody else got sick, because I imagine somebody else would assume the leadership role before they got to the last 1 or 2. So if you're mostly light gray, you'd be the last 1 or 2 to say, fine, I'll take on the leadership role if I have to, but I don't really want to. Or, the leader of the group would force you to take on the leadership role for your development. So that's leadership if you're mostly light gray. Now, no social anxiety. So if you're mostly yellow here, basically you can go out to any social setting, you can go to a party, you can go to a networking event, and you're fine. You can just talk to anyone or not talk to anyone. Whatever happens, you're good with it. If you're lighter gray on this, that means, you sort of a little bit quieter. If you can avoid talking to people, you might find sort of a spot in the corner rather than just getting right out there and talking to everybody. So that is social anxiety. All right, so hopefully you've got a sense of ambition. And again, if you have questions or anything, that's what the Thursday calls are for, okay? So let's get into sociability. So the description here, sociability is a prediction of how much you like to interact, how sociable you are, how frequently you like social interaction. And then you can sort of see your own personal score interpretation. So I'm not going to read this because, again, this is the sample. So your score interpretation is the second category. And same as last time, the third category is a discussion point. So we'll get to those in just a second. Same thing. So I'll go through it. The high scores for sociability. If you're highly social, you're always busy, you're full of energy, you're talkative, you're friendly, you love building relationships with a lot of people. Sometimes the one thing people can do if you're very, very sociable, you can get caught in like doing, right? So you're doing a lot of stuff and you're busy, but you're not actually accomplishing anything. So people who are highly sociable might use the phrase, I'm busy a lot. And they're, going from one party to the next. And I got a wedding to go to and I got to go buy gifts for this person. And I got work and I worked overtime. And they have all this stuff going on all the time if they're very sociable. But sometimes, not always, they won't be actually accomplishing anything because everything becomes really important and they love that energy of activity. So Somebody who's highly sociable would be like that. And also, they might accomplish less because this would be the Facebook ding, right? The email dings. Ooh, gotta look at that. Ooh, gotta look at that. Ooh, gotta answer my phone. Oh, gotta answer a text message. So the sociable person has that kind of energy to them, okay? If you are low on sociability, you're more likely to listen. You'll talk a little, you'll listen more than you will talk. You'll be more thoughtful. You're the type of person, you might be, an accountant or, a researcher. You can work by yourself for long periods of time. Maybe you're a copywriter, something like that. But you tend to work by yourself for long periods of time. You're more task oriented, a little bit more business like. So I tend towards the lower end of the scale, and then I have sort of a sociable side too. But I tended to be very much like, okay, I've got the work to get done. I do the work. I close my door. When the work gets done, then I talk to people. And when I'm extremely busy, if someone interrupts my workflow, I'm not a very nice person. And the people who've worked with me know that. They understand that. It's a bit of a joke. But when I'm in the zone, there's a lot to get done. I always get it done because I tend to be more on the low sociability, task oriented side. And I'll be very honest, for me, the sociable people drove me nuts because I'm trying to get work done. And they were coming in to chat me up, and then they'd ask me to do more work that they didn't have time to do. And I'd be like, well, you were chatting me up the whole time. You could have got it done. So I'm sharing that with you because it gives you a sense of how both sides will perceive things, right? The sociable person, they're just like being friendly. They want to talk. They want to relate. And the work will get done. Don't worry about it. And the task oriented is like, I got to get this stuff done. That's the mentality, right? So they're less likely to interrupt others because, like me, you might get a little irritated with the interruptions, a little bit more formal. And because they're so work-oriented, the people who are on the lower end of the scale, you tend to forget to give feedback, right? Because you're so busy doing the work, you forget about the interactions. So the middle of the scale, a little bit more approachable, not quite as distant as the person who's very on the lower end of the scale. Little flow back and forth. They can work alone. They can talk to others. They can be formal or informal. Better at providing feedback, and they're better at balancing listening and talking. Okay. So the middle of scale has the balance. The sociable is really, they're fun, they're playful, they bring the entertainment, they bring the joy, they've got that thing going on. And then you've got the people who do the work, they're focused, they're a little bit more quiet. And then we've got the ones in the middle. Okay. So that is the sociability scale. And again, you can ask yourself these questions, is it important for every team member to contribute, right? So somebody who's highly social, they might tend to take over a meeting. A person who isn't social would avoid talking altogether. And then somebody who's in the middle, they might be concerned about, hey, is everyone contributing? Can we ask some questions that we haven't heard from so-and-so for a while? How do you balance talking with listening? So just pay attention to that. If you were listening to me right now, you would think I'm highly sociable, but I don't have anyone here to talk to. If you're coaching with me, you'd notice I listen probably 70% of the time and I talk about 30% of the time. So, of course, I have to give examples of myself because I know myself better. But that's kind of how you can look at it. Do you tend to work better in a group or individual projects, right? So some people just love the group work and others are like, let me do this on my own. Working in a group annoys me. So if working in a group is a little bit annoying to you, then it would make sense that you are lower on this particular scale. And you'll get a sense of it. So again, just ask yourself those questions. Take notes if you are confused about anything and you've got the Thursday call. So now I'm going to sort of go into the subscales again. So the first one is likes parties, pretty self-explanatory. If you're high on the yellow, that means you enjoy going out. You like going to the club. You like going to the party. If you are like on the lighter gray side, you're probably the more of the type to curl up with a movie, a tea, maybe a glass of wine, read a book, that kind of a thing. Okay. Experience seeking. If you are mostly yellow like this example, you would enjoy larger groups, being around a lot of people, just going to that, the big party, like the house party you see on the movies, right? Or if you're if you're more towards the gray side of this scale, that means you like groups 2 or 3, having some intimate conversation, really having a deeper conversation versus the big, wild party, which would be more yellow. In terms of entertaining, if you are more yellow, you'd be more charming, amusing, more humorous. If you're on a little bit more light gray here, you'd be more, reserved, thoughtful. You more, what's the word? You'd probably have deeper relationships, if that makes sense. Okay. In terms of likes, crowds. So again, this is really about liking really large groups versus choosing sort of smaller groups. And then we've got exhibitionist, which is somebody who is very attention seeking. So I don't know, this would be the type of person who goes to a party, there's a stage, they get up on the stage, I don't know, they whip around their tie and, Mike, 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 and they would say, they'd have some big hilarious story to tell versus somebody who is not an exhibitionist, might be sitting at their table being like, oh my God, what is this guy or girl, maybe her scarf instead. They might be like, I can't believe they're doing that. Like, they're fun to watch, but I would just die. I couldn't do that. Okay, so that kind of a thing. And I think I did this again. I am so sorry. Sorry. Okay, experience seeking. I need to go back here. I'm sorry. This is my little it'll come up later. I'll explain it to you when we get there, but you'll understand why I do this. This is one of my little jumpy, weird characteristics that I have, comes up with flexibility. So experience seeking, this is somebody who you would tend to seek out new experiences. So experiences can be I want to go to different restaurants. I want to travel. I want to try all these different kinds of wines. I want to, get on a roller coaster, drive a fast car, get in a jet, that kind of a thing. You want to do these wild, crazy things. A lot of variety. If you're on the gray side, then you want to have something a little bit more comfortable, steady, predictable. So things that are unpredictable, if you're mostly light gray here, would kind of annoy you. The surprise party would kind of annoy you, that kind of thing. An experience-seeking person would love the surprise party, okay? So if I confused you on any of these things, I apologize, especially experience-seeking, because that's my brain jumping around to different things, sorry. If I confused you, please do let me know on the Thursday call. I will more than happily clarify for you, okay? So let's jump to interpersonal sensitivity. So you can see the description. It's charm, warmth, tact, social skill. Those people, they will come to a party and they just have this warm, light, they just make you think of cookies, right? So somebody who's really interpersonally sensitive would have that quality, and that's an extreme example, but of interpersonal sensitivity. But we'll get into more detail of what this looks like. So you've got your score interpretation there, and then we'll get into the discussion points. So I will tell you, high interpersonal sensitivity is somebody who's generally pleasant, they're rewarding, it's just fun and nice to be around them. They're typically socially appropriate. They tend to be team players, right? So remember we were talking about ambition, and the people who had lower ambition tended to be better team players. So if you have high ambition and high interpersonal sensitivity, you could have a really cool combination where even though you're ambitious, you're very rewarding for your team. Your team likes being around you. They learn from you. So a combination of high ambition and high interpersonal sensitivity, that can be really powerful, okay? They're very good at reading those social cues. So again, where somebody who's just ambitious and low interpersonal sensitivity, they might just say it straight up, right? The social cues wouldn't be that great. So you might sort of find, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but there's a technical leader and an interpersonal leader. So person who's ambitious and high on interpersonal sensitivity would be, a managerial personal leader. And then if you were lower on interpersonal sensitivity but high on ambition, then you would be more likely to be a technical leader. So, really smart, really know their stuff. People come to you because of your expertise, but they don't necessarily come to you because you're the nicest person in the world. They come to you because you're smart, you know your stuff, like they admire you, all of that kind of stuff. But you might, there might be a little bit of roughness around the edges. So like potentially like a Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is probably quite high, very high on ambition, quite low on interpersonal sensitivity, but he still has tons of admirers. So that type of a personality type. Gandhi would be high on interpersonal sensitivity and high on it. He wouldn't necessarily actually be very high on ambition. He had more of a goal. So Gandhi would probably be much more higher on interpersonal sensitivity. Mother Teresa, higher on interpersonal sensitivity, depending on how you interpret her work and what's really happened, but then lower on ambition, right? So you can have great, great leaders who are not necessarily very ambitious. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay. So let's go back to those high scores on interpersonal sensitivity. So they tend to read those social cues. They tend to promise more than they can deliver, right? So, for example, I'm going to go back to the Gandhi example, right? He tended to deliver, but he just went onto a hunger strike until India was liberated, right? So that could have been a much bigger promise than something he could deliver. It worked out in the end. So that's the type of thing. And interpersonal leaders would avoid confrontation, right? So Gandhi, like nonviolent protest, right? So very avoidant of confrontation. So he's a really good example of somebody who would be high on interpersonal sensitivity. Now, somebody who's low on interpersonal sensitivity, I'm going to use Steve Jobs because he's kind of a great example of this. Like, if you've seen the movie, I haven't seen him at work, but he would confront poor performance. He had a standard, he wanted it met, and if people said it couldn't be done, that was unacceptable. So he was very confronting of people who were not creating the results that he envisioned. He would take and maintain unpopular positions, right? So he had a vision, and the vision needed to be created, even if everyone was saying it's impossible, this is ridiculous, the timeline is not appropriate. He would take and maintain that unpopular position. He would enforce those standards of performance, hard-nosed, and he could bulldoze his agendas, right? So he's a great example of a leader who is low on interpersonal sensitivity. And so I want you to see those. Like, there is no good and bad, right? You can have people who are on one side of the scale and get phenomenal results and transform the world, and people are on the extreme other side of the scale and just also get phenomenal results, but in a completely different way. And then now we have the average score. So generally easygoing and a little bit more tolerant of others. So people who are very high on interpersonal sensitivity could sometimes be considered doormats, right? They might not get that. You might feel like, I'm not getting the respect. I'm so good. I'm so nice. I help people all the time, and they just don't respect me. So somebody who's more towards the middle, they'll be a little bit more easygoing, but they're also they'll also say what needs to be said, right? So a little bit more tolerant, but not as tolerant as somebody who's high on interpersonal sensitivity. They're considerate. They consider other people's opinions, right? So they'll take into account what everybody says, but they'll be more likely to say, okay, I've heard all of you, but this is the best decision. This is where I think we need to go. They make promises that are more in line with what they can actually deliver. So they're less likely to overpromise and underdeliver. So somebody who's very high on interpersonal sensitivity might overpromise and underdeliver. Somebody who's moderate will say, listen, this is what I can do, and this is what I will get done. So they're quite reasonable in what they promise to do. They're structured, but they also, so they have goals, they have structure, they have drive, but they also will spend the time talking to their staff, building that relationship and talking a little bit about their personal life. So somebody who's sort of in the middle will fall in that area, and then they'll also be the type to confront problems, right? So somebody who's high on interpersonal sensitivity, they might not confront problems. They might be a little bit more quiet, hide out in the background, but they're just so nice. They're the nicest people. Somebody who's low, they're goal oriented, man. They're just going forward, and somebody in the middle, they're gonna balance the two. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think I've given you quite a few different ways of thinking about interpersonal sensitivity. So this time I won't go that deep into the discussion points. I think you should get it by now. If you are challenged with anything, again, you've got the call on Thursday. So let's look at the subscale composition, right? So if you're mostly yellow on easy to live with, you're seen, your others view you as easygoing, right? If you're mostly gray, they're going to see you as a little bit hard around the edges, like a little bit more hard-nosed, a little bit more blunt. So I've been told, just so you get a sense, I tend to be higher on interpersonal sensitivity, but I'm probably a little bit more towards the gray side in terms of easy to live with, because I can be very blunt and straightforward. Okay, caring, mostly yellow, perceptive and understanding. So they're really just, they listen, they really understand what people need, they know what to do. If you're lower, more towards the gray, again, this is probably like, we have a goal to achieve, we're after it. And you know, if somebody's parent is ill, you'll be like, I know it happens to everybody, and you'll get back onto that goal orientation. Okay, so if you're lower on somebody higher on caring would spend more time and you know, tell the people that they work with, it's okay, I understand your parent is sick, take a few days off and then come back. And somebody who's a little bit lower would say, yeah, you know, it happens to everybody, it sucks, I totally get it, and they'd just be back to work again. Hostility, if you're mostly yellow, you're generally open and accepting of people. If you are mostly gray, you, in your head, even if you don't say it out loud, you say things like, oh my God, people are just idiots. They're so annoying. I can't believe they can't figure this out. So there would be more of a sense of frustration and irritation with, let's just say more generally, the human condition. If you are more higher on the sensitive scale, you will tend to be more tactful in the way you deliver messages. So people will feel like you're more kind and considerate and caring. If you're lower on sensitive, you'll be more blunt and unintentionally even say things that would offend people. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I should pull out my scales. I will probably do that in a little bit. Okay, and then likes people. So if you're mostly yellow, you like being around people, you have fun with them. If you're on the gray side, you'd probably be more socially withdrawn and be probably a little bit more blunt, because I don't know, everyone seems to know one of those people who says they hate people all the time, but they tend to be really funny. So that is the interpersonal sensitivity scale. Okay, so let's talk about prudence. So the prudence scale represents self-control, conscientiousness, work ethic, this idea of being very planful, organized, hardworking, dependable, reliable, following the rules. You get the sense? So when you're high on prudence, that's kind of where you will live. So I just covered the description. You can look at your own personal score interpretation, and I'm going to get right into what high scores on prudence look like. So somebody who's very high on prudence is very likely to work very hard for their company. They're going to follow the rules and procedures. They're going to plan in advance. They're going to look forward and think, oh my goodness, what are all the possible things that could happen, and how could things change down the road? What can I do today? They probably have their calendar completely filled out every single day, every single moment, color coded. All their training is in their calendar, so their full calendar is planned out. So that is somebody who is high on prudence. They also might have this mentality of they know how to do everything right, and people won't really understand those intricate details that makes their work so special. They might not understand the planning that goes involved, exactly where to place a particular image, how to write a sentence with this particular flow. So they have a certain way of doing things. So somebody who's high on prudence may tend to micromanage or have trouble delegating because nobody can do anything as good as they do, right? So if you're high on prudence, you know you're having this thought right now as I speak this. So you might recognize yourself saying this. You might not even be necessarily high on prudence, but this might come up for some of you. So this is something to take note of as you go through this process. What are the thoughts you're having? Are they aligning with what I'm saying? Are you high on prudence and going, oh, yes, 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 that's me. Or are you high on prudence going, oh, it's not really quite me. I wonder what that's about. If that's happening again, on the calls, jump on and ask some questions and we can help you clarify that. And that might be an area for you to work on or recognize or ask some questions about so that you can develop more insight around what might be going on there, okay? The other thing that can happen with somebody who's high on prudence, because everything has to be just in a certain place in a certain way, you can tend to get really bogged down on details. So I remember when I worked as a consultant, I had a boss and he was very high on prudence and he would go nuts that the font on every single slide on a slide deck wasn't exactly the same and of exactly the same size. I'm not that high on prudence. I couldn't even see that was going on. So it would drive both of us crazy because I would be like, what's the big deal? We just have to get the content out. And he'd be all worried about the perfect spacing and the periods and the commas. And I'd just be like, if they understand what they need to know, that's all that really matters. I don't really care if the font is exactly the same size on every single page. It just didn't concern me as long as it was, pretty reasonable. I was in the range of pretty reasonable, right? So somebody high on prudence needs everything very boom, 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 timing, boom, 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 appearance, boom, boom, boom. They have structures, they have rules, that kind of a feeling, okay? Somebody who's low on prudence, they tend to be more comfortable with a lack of structure, a lack of, more ambiguity. They just tend to go with the flow. They probably don't have very much in their calendar. They're like, I feel like writing something, so I'm going to write it. I don't feel like doing this, I'm not going to do it. So they're got that very go with the flow thing about them. They can change directions quickly. They might be pretty easily distractible because, I'm going with the flow. Something popped up, I'll go handle that. And if something new popped up, I'll go handle that. So they have that kind of mentality. They don't generally plan ahead. They can be great in emergencies because they'll just think on their feet and go boom, 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 and make it happen. But they can also get really, kind of bored and uninspired if they're doing something repetitive like data entry or report writing or I don't know, if you're making memes and you're making the same kind of memes and there's very limited artistic element to that can get really boring for them. So anything that is kind of same every day, they're not learning something new, there's not something spontaneous, somebody who's low on prudence could get very bored, okay? Somebody who's moderate in prudence, they're pretty dependable. They'll have some schedule. They won't be very rigid about their schedule. They might have a few things in their calendar, like the most important meetings, and then they would probably leave everything else relatively open and just work around that. Somebody who's moderate they're adjustable to change. They'll have a balance between speed and accuracy. So somebody who's low on prudence would probably get things done pretty quickly and, quote, slap things together, right? So they just put things together really fast and they're like, okay, it's done. And then they'd probably work with their team members who would say, okay, you missed this, let's move this around. And, they'd have people there to support them to make their first draft better, right? Somebody who's high on prudence would only have one draft and the one draft would be the perfect draft. And then they'd try to make it even better. Somebody who's moderate in prudence would sort of say, hey, you know what? This is pretty good. Like, it's not perfect. We can always make it better, but this is pretty good. I'm happy presenting this. So they'd have that sort of that middle ground of knowing this is good enough, right? They wouldn't try to shortcut it. They wouldn't necessarily need people on their team to support them to say, like, dude, this is weird. And then they wouldn't necessarily get so detail oriented that it has to be perfect. Okay. So somebody who's in the middle, yes, they will plan, they will have schedules, they'll be able to leverage their team a little bit more, right? So they'll have their schedule, they'll know things need to be done within a certain time frame, and they will tend to delegate. And because it doesn't have to be done in a very precise way, they'll be able to work with their team and use what their team provides without having to say, well, this needs to be exactly this way. And so they won't tend to micromanage quite as much, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. That is the prudence scale. And to get a sense, if you're high on prudence or low, think about like how structured are you? Is your calendar completely full with every single moment of your day planned? Is everything color coded? And do those color coded things flow into some other planning thing? Do you have multiple lists? Does your family have a colored coded list on the fridge? That's probably somebody who's high on prudence, right? So you probably look at your scale and go, yep, that's me. If it's not lining up, again, ask questions. If you're low on prudence, again, you might have some lists that aren't totally crossed off. Like you might start a number of new lists without finishing them. You might have nothing in your calendar. Might have one or two things in your calendar. You may be a little bit more likely to skip a meeting and go, oh my gosh, I totally lost track of time. Somebody who's low in prudence might be a little bit like that, right? Also, if you're high on prudence, you're more likely to follow rules and regulations and worry about not breaking the law. Not that I'm suggesting anyone would break the law, but there's little like speeding, right? You might be more inclined to speed if you're low on prudence. So think about those little types of things and get a sense of how you show up on a daily basis, okay? So I'm going to go into the sub-skill compositions now. So let's look at the first one, which is moralistic. So somebody who's moralistic, I just really talked about that already, but it's really somebody who's willing to follow the rules. You would probably love the policies and procedures in your organization. Again, you probably rarely break the speed limit. You rarely break jaywalk, that kind of a thing. And if you're low on moralistic, you probably have a set of rules. You're probably driven more by an internal moral or values compass. So you have your own idea of what's right and wrong, and it's not set externally. It's set for you internally. Does that make sense? All right. So if you are virtuous, that's somebody who's very precise and diligent. So when you're working, it's probably a very sort of a rhythmic kind of a feeling. You probably love things like spreadsheets, and you probably have very cool organizational systems. And you probably see life in a little bit of black and white. This is right, this is wrong. This is how you do it, this is not how you do it. If you're lower on virtuous, you probably have some like minor faults and things like that, and you're more willing to say like, oh, I screwed that, oops, I screwed that up, oops, sorry, that kind of a thing. I didn't mean to do that oops thing. I couldn't say it, but that kind of a thing. Now, if you're on the next scale is not spontaneous. So if it's very yellow for not spontaneous, that means you plan everything out. Everything is structured. You know exactly what's going to happen next, what time you're going to go to the airport, what time you're going to check in, what time you're going to be in the security line, what time you're going to be at the gate, and then how, you're going to be in that lineup 10, 15, 20 minutes ahead, right? If somebody who's spontaneous might, more gray on this scale, they would go to the airport and say, let's go to the airport, let's do some shopping, maybe we can get a meal, and oh my gosh, we almost missed our flight, and they're running to the gate. They might get to the airport late. There's a little bit more of an unexpected mentality. So as I'm saying those things to you, you'll kind of know where you are on the scale. If none of that triggered you, you're probably near the middle. If you were so triggered by somebody who plans every detail of the airport, knows exactly what time they're going to be at the gate and lines up, and you're just like, you're probably more on the gray. And if you freaked out by the person who goes to the restaurant and almost always misses their flight, you're probably more on the yellow side. So that's a good way to sort of gauge where you are on the not spontaneous scale. And then the next one is avoids trouble. So somebody who avoids trouble anticipates the consequences of their actions. So they would be more like, oh, well, if I speed in this area, there might be a police officer. There's always a police officer under this bridge. So I'm not going to speed in this area. Or they may never speed because they're always worried that they might get caught if they're speeding. So they would think about those types of things, or they'd be a little bit more cautious about, I don't know if you're, I'm trying to think of something like something to do with parents, right? Because parents are often associated with getting in trouble. So you might be more cautious about what you share with your parents or something along those lines, or saying something controversial online or something along those lines. And if you are more towards gray or lower on the avoids trouble scale, then you're more prone to risk taking. So you probably like to speed, roller coasters, mountain climbing, a little bit like more wild activities, probably walking around the streets and enjoying yourself at like 3 a.m. in the morning, that kind of a thing, where somebody who's high on avoids trouble would freak out at the concept of you walking around at 3 a.m. in the morning and think it's totally irresponsible. So that's sort of the avoids trouble. And if you're sort of thinking like, oh my God, somebody who freaks out at about walking around at 3 a.m. in the morning is so uptight, right? So you can kind of think of the different ways that people think about this concept of prudence, right? Now, mastery. So mastery, if you're high on mastery, you're concerned about doing a good job and always improving and being a hard worker and wanting to get better and better and better and really develop your skills. If you're lower on mastery, you're going to have more of a relaxed attitude, right? It's kind of good enough. It'll get me by. It's like, doesn't have to be perfect. So you might have some areas in your life where mastery is very important to you, and you might have other areas where mastery isn't that important to you. But if mastery is kind of important to you across the board, that's a pretty good sign you're high on prudence, okay? The next one is not autonomous. So I'll bring the arrow back here. So not autonomous, that kind of aligns with the very first one we discussed, which is called adjustment. So if you are high on the scale, it's pretty likely that you're probably lower on adjustment. And that's because people who are high on not autonomous tend to want others' opinions on different things. So an easy common way that you might recognize this is somebody who's not autonomous would really want to ask all their friends, like, does this outfit look good on me? Do you like this outfit? Should I try this? And they probably take a friend with them when they're shopping all the time. And, you probably get some advice from your significant other, versus if you're low on the autonomous scale, you might be the trendsetter. You know what looks good in fashion. You don't need anyone to tell you. You already know, right? So if you're low on autonomous, you're probably higher on adjustment. And if you're high on autonomous, you're probably lower on adjustment. So that's just something interesting you might want to look at. See, does this make sense? Does this sound like me? And then the last one is impulse control. So somebody who's high on impulse control would tend to play it safe, right? They're going to do the cautious thing, the smart thing. They're not going to do the high diving board. They're not going to easily get distracted by phone calls or Facebook, or they're just going to be like, I'm here to do my work. Things don't distract them. So if their friend said, let's go out for a drink, they're not going to go out for a drink. They have a goal. They have something to get done, and that's not going to distract them or even tempt them. If you're lower on impulse control and your friends say, let's go out for a drink, or if you don't drink, let's go out dancing, or, let's take a spontaneous trip to LA or the Dominican or something, like you'd be more inclined to do that, where the person who's high on impulse control might think through all the implications of that decision, and rather than jumping on that plane to LA would think, well, how will that impact my business? How many clients do I have next week? Where the person who's lower on impulse control would get on that plane, go to LA, get so excited by the idea, then get to LA, and then start asking the questions of, oh no, I didn't think about this. And then they backtrack and figure it out. Does that make sense? So that is prudence. So we've got I think we've got 3 more to go on this. Let me see, I'm going to double check. We have 2 more to go on the Hogan Personality Inventory. And then I highly recommend, if you haven't taken a break, go take a nice long break, and then we'll do the 2 more, then take a break, and then come back for the rest. So I think total, I'm just sort of timing this and getting a sense of how long this is taking. Going through these inventories should take about 3 to 3.5 hours. So plan your day, week accordingly. This doesn't have to all be done in one day. If you don't get to the call this Thursday, you can get to it next Thursday. So don't worry about this. You can do this and learn about yourself while doing the other elements of the course. So don't let yourself get bogged down in these 3 hours. The information is valuable. You'll absolutely get a lot out of it, but you don't have to get bogged down in it. Okay. So we'll get to the next one, which is, what is the next one? The next one we're going to get to is going to be inquisitive. Inquisitive. So the inquisitive scale predicts curiosity, creativity, openness to experience and ideas. You can read over your score interpretations. And again, I'll get into the high scores. So the high scores, they're very big picture thinkers. So they can be very visionary about business. They think very quickly on their feet. They're problem solvers. You've got probably your artists are in this area. They have sort of like this worldly view, so they're probably very into traveling, and not just traveling to sort of locations that's close by. So I'm just going to think about some common locations in North America, but they wouldn't typically go to, Vegas or, I don't know, LA might be another common one, or, Disneyland or those types of places. Somebody who's inquisitive would be trying to go to various places like the Maldives and Bali and Europe and Spain and, trying to like Costa Rica and Puglia. And so somebody who's inquisitive would just, they want to be immersed in culture and ideas and food and books. And so it's a very big picture. They might be interested in the business visionaries and what they do in the cutting edge research. So Peter Diamandis, right? Bold, that's the type of person who would be very high on it, inquisitive. If you don't know who he is, look him up. So they're not really the implementers. They're the big idea people. They come up with the great ideas. Elon Musk, right? He would be high on inquisitive, and he gets other people to do the work. So he asks the big, bold questions that people would just go, that's crazy, that's impossible. And they make that idea of impossible possible, right? So their ideas can possibly be very impractical and crazy, like boring a tunnel and creating like a high-speed train from LA to New York. That's Elon Musk, right? So inquisitive thinks like that. Somebody who's a low score on inquisitive, they're very practical and strategic. They're implementers. They look at the problems where they exist. So they don't create new problems and ask huge questions. They say, this is a problem in my current business. How do I solve it? This is a problem in front of me. How do I solve it? So they look at the local problems, right? So people who are low on inquisitive, right? They look at in a local level. They look here, and then they say, how do I solve it? How do I implement? How do I change these things? So they understand how to make things a reality. They don't necessarily look at the big corporate vision. And they stay within the lines of standards and procedures. So somebody who's lower on inquisitive, it might be an engineer, right? The engineer goes, okay, you want to create this train. And then they'll say, okay, well, these are the formulas, these are the approaches. How do we test and experiment and use those approaches to make this wild idea of this tunnel and this high-speed train? How do we make it a reality, right? So high inquisitive does not work without low inquisitive. Low inquisitive can actually work without high inquisitive, but high inquisitive will pretty much never get anything done without people who are low on inquisitive, okay? Now the moderate tend to be the flexible problem solvers. They're probably the translators who take the big picture that the people who are low on inquisitive think is insane and can't be done, and they live in the land of possibility and translation between the practical and the wild and crazy. So the mid-range, they'll work in their business, but they'll also have interests outside of business, right? So they're not they're not, I'm almost trying to think like an engineer tinkering on something small, right? And then you have your big picture thinkers, and then you have your middle, and so they're probably in charge of a business unit. They're not really totally engaged with the vision of the organization, but they've got the business unit down. That's how like the person who's moderate on inquisitive seems to think. They'll speculate about business scenarios, how things affect their area of expertise. They have some imagination, but they'll look at like what's the practical solution, right? So they'll kind of, they can relate to the big ideas and the ideas of people who are high on inquisitive, but they don't necessarily come up with them, right? And then the people who are low on inquisitive, they're going to be resisting these ideas. They're going to be saying they're not practical, they don't work. And the people who are moderate and inquisitive are going to say, no, it's possible. Let's see how we can make this happen. And so they're the translators. And inquisitive, everybody works together. And this is a really great example of how there are no wrongs or greats, or it's just in this area you can, none of the different types of people can really create without being in touch with other people, with other styles of inquisitiveness. Okay. So you can ask your questions like, do you like routine? Is that really important to you? And like tasks and responsibilities. So you can ask yourself those types of questions. Are you always sort of linking what you're doing to the big strategic goals? Or do you just create the strategic goals and not care about that linkage between what you're doing? Are you only thinking about the day-to-day and not thinking about how the day-to-day is attached to the big picture, right? So if you're only day-to-day, that's easy, right? Low inquisitive. If you're all strategic goals, that means you're high inquisitive. If you're doing the linking, that means you're in the middle, okay? So the sub-skill compositions. So if you are in science ability, that's, you want to know like why. I need to know why things are happening. Like mostly with people, like I'm so fascinated by why people do what they do. Surprise, surprise, guess what I'm doing? So if you're in the science ability range and you're high, you have a strong interest in why things happen. And you're always asking like, why is this happening? Like, why is the sky blue? Why is traffic like this? Why is this bridge over here or not over there? You might be asking questions like, I don't know, why are ferries so damn slow? I don't know why, that's just one. Or, why do planes fly at the height that they fly? So you would be asking that if you were high on science ability. And if you're low, you're just going to be like, I don't give a crap. I'm in the plane. I'm getting to where I want to go. Why are you asking these annoying questions? So that's what science ability looks like, okay? Thrill seeking. If you're high on thrill seeking, really easy. You're looking for challenge, stimulation, excitement. Again, you might like the casino, roller coasters, different environments, people, fashion, food. Like a fashion show might thrill you because they have the music, they have the fashion, they have the models, they have, the backdrops, they have these environments. So you might love the environment of a fashion show. And this idea of also going beyond your limits. So creating something crazy, right? So somebody who's high on inquisitive, right? Elon Musk, he's like going for that thrill of creating, like going to the freaking moon, right? So that's somebody who's high on thrill seeking. If you're low, you don't really care. You're just doing your work. You're very day to day. You don't give a crap about going to the moon. You think these people are impractical dreamers, and you just want to do your day to day work. You want to study what you study, stay in your zone, and you don't really have time for these big dreamers, and they kind of annoy you, but you'll do the work to help their big dreams come true. Okay, so if you're low on thrill seeking, that's where you would be at. In terms of generating ideas, if you're high, obviously your just ideas come to you like wild, and you can just go. So a fun way to test this is you just go to a room, you pick a topic. So what is a good topic? Okay, I'm gonna give you this one you can actually use for your business. I want you guys to see how many ideas you can generate for growing your business. Aim for 100, okay? And then go to the Facebook group and type in how many ideas you came up with, and then share if you're high on inquisitive or low on inquisitive, right? So typically we would expect people who generate 100 ideas or more would be higher on inquisitive. And if you come across as like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 20, you'd be lower, right? So we don't know exactly, right, what those numbers are going to be, but this will be like a fun experiment to see how your ability to generate ideas correlates with inquisitive, okay? The next one is curiosity. So again, if you're high on curiosity, you ask a lot of questions, a lot of whys. Why does this work this way? Why is the sky blue? I don't know. Why are people so nice to each other? Why are people jerks? Why can't men and women get along? Why did they get along so well? You'll just ask all these questions, and you'll question yourself and come across these things if you're high on curiosity. With your clients, you'll have so many questions with your clients, like why do they do business the way they do? How do they reach their goals? And so on and so forth. If you're low on curiosity, you're just not going to ask those questions. You're just going to assume, it works out. It's not really a concern of mine, okay? Intellectual games. If you're high on intellectual games, you like riddles, your puzzles, Riddler, right? Batman. You'll like that kind of stuff. Scrabble, things like that. If you're low on intellectual games, you're just going to think that's like a stupid waste of time. No point. So if there's a thing admitted here, it's called Games for the Brain. Like, for me, that's kind of downtime. And if you just think of this concept, go look up Games for the Brain. I'm going to teach you how to procrastinate like crazy. I'm sorry. But if some of you will love it and some of you will think it's the stupidest thing in the world. And that's going to tell you if you're high on inquisitive or not. And then the last one there is culture. And so culture is a wide variety of interests, again, from food to fashion to books to movies. So if you're very high on culture, you're going to love all of that stuff. If you're lower on culture, you're not really going to care. For you, food is eating, and you have no time for these like hipster foodies. Like, they're just annoying to you. Clothes are for wearing and keeping you warm. Fashion is frivolous, right? So if you're high on culture, fashion, being a foodie, trying wines, and being a wine snob, and all of this stuff is going to be really fun for you. If you're low on culture, you're just not going to care. So that is inquisitive. And let's see, I think we'll just get into learning approach as well. So learning approach is the last one here for the Hogan Personality Inventory. And so that predicts your learning style and how you like to gather knowledge. So you can look at your own score interpretation and then ask the key thing is for you to determine how you keep your knowledge up to date. So a really easy way of understanding this is if you're high on learning approach, you're going to really enjoy reading research articles, books, technical manuals. You want to learn those new skills through reading and maybe watching webinars or signing up for courses. If you're low on a learning approach, it doesn't mean you don't like to learn. It means you like to learn differently. So an apprenticeship, volunteering to work for somebody, writing marketing copy 100 times until it feels right to you. So you're going to apply and learn versus read and learn or watch a webinar and learn. So somebody who's low on learning approach, they're going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to do a lot of networking. They're going to talk to entrepreneurs, and then they're going to take that information and then they're going to apply it and learn through that application, or they might take a job with another entrepreneur and work with them and learn through working with somebody else, okay? So that's how you can really understand learning approach. And I'll go through the sub-skills really quickly. So education, if you are high on education, it means you like the idea of going to school. You like that school environment. You probably, have your bachelor's or your master's or you've done some form of continuing education. If you're low on education, you don't really care. You're just like, I just want to get a job. I don't understand the point of school. School is ridiculous. Now, some of you might have been high on education and flipped and think school is ridiculous now, but that is what education means. And now the next one that we're going to look at is good memory. And good memory, it's basically, do you have accurate recall? Or if you have if you're low on this one, that means you're somewhat forgetful. And then the next one is math ability. And just means if you're really good with numbers or you're not so good with numbers. And the final one is reading, and that's if you tend to read to keep your knowledge up to date versus not really being into reading. So these ones are pretty basic, straightforward, good with numbers, not. Do you like reading? Do you not? Do you have a good memory? Did you like going to school? Pretty basic, but that does not in any way, shape, or form mean that you can't learn and have that level of education. It simply means that you learn in a different way. So some people learn by doing, some people are more school types, right? So it's a little bit of street smarts versus book smarts, okay? So we've done it. This is the first assessment, which is the Hogan Personality Inventory. And then the next one we are going to look at is the Hogan Development Survey, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this. Go take a break, go rest. I know it's a long one. And then come back to the next one and take notes on any of the questions you have. And yes, it's got to be longer because I've got to make sure I have everything covered for all of you, okay? So hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you for the Hogan Development Survey.